Today, it is my very great honor to welcome back as my guest Barbara Karnes, and I'm sure many of you listening know Barbara, but I'm going to read her bio or parts of her bio just for anyone who's not familiar with her work. Barbara is an RN who is an internationally recognized author, speaker, thought leader, and expert on end-of-life care and the dynamics of dying. She is the author of the 1985 publication of Gone From My Sight, The Dying Experience, which so many of you, anyone who's worked in hospice, will know as the Little Blue Hospice book, which I will say it's been in every hospice I've ever worked at, and an amazing little book that's so very helpful for families. Gone From My Sight has sold over 30 million copies worldwide, is published in 12 languages, and remains the leading resource on the market today, educating families on the science of approaching death. Barbara also has at least 4 films, and her film, New Rules for End-of-Life Care, was featured in film festivals around the world and was the recipient of 10 prestigious film awards. So you can learn more about all of Barbara's works, her books, her documentaries at bkbooks.com. About what it actually takes to do hospice care at home, because sometimes I think people also have a misunderstanding that hospice may come in and provide 24/7 care, and it's important that people understand that that's not what hospice offers. So people need to know exactly what it takes to care for someone at home to know if they're able to do it or not.
Well, and it's 24/7 care for the caregiver. Um,
I will say the hospice team has been the most creative medical team I've ever worked on. I've always, that's one thing I've loved about it. But being in a situation where everyone puts their heads together and says, how can we make this happen? How can we solve this problem? How can we do this and accomplish it? And it's really incredible to see some of the stories that come from that kind of work.
well, and as you're talking, I'm remembering I had my mother on hospice, and in my home. And here is I'll tell you the story because I want to make a point that the guidance that you can get during this challenging time. My mother and I didn't have a fantastic relationship. And now she's living with me, and I'm her primary caregiver. And I quit my job as the director of a hospice so I can take care of her. But I have my hospice team. And I was really struggling with taking care of her. And I called my hospice social worker one morning crying. And I said, Diane, I realize I don't love my mother. And I am just sobbing. And she said, I'll be right there. She came over. She was there within 30 minutes. She probably broke every speeding record there was. And we went in my bedroom, and she sat with me and let me cry it out. And then she said, Barbara, I want you to know that you are loving your mother. Love is a verb. It's an action word, and you are loving her in the care you are giving her. Think of the wisdom.
Wow.
That's what hospice does. Yes, they'll help us get to Hawaii, but it's that kind of emotional support that you're not alone as you're taking care of your special person. All kinds of stuff comes up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah, all of these emotional issues come to the surface, and sometimes tension between family members, and we all need help with those situations. But it can be such a fruitful time of healing and growth, and just beginning to have compassion for ourselves and learning more about ourselves as we go through it. But that's why the fact that we have a team of people like the social worker, the chaplain, the home health aide, the nurse, the volunteer, all of these people who are there with their unique talents and wisdom and expertise to offer.
Because it's 24/7 work. It's not easy taking care of someone as end of life approaches. But it's also can be the most sacred, wonderful experience ever. Medicine, we became more medically oriented, and grandma went from being sick at home into the hospital or into a nursing facility. And then grandma died away from us, and we didn't see it. We didn't watch the natural progression. We got a call that grandma's died. And the next time we saw her was in a funeral home in a casket with a dress we had to go by. Hospice in the 70s, the late 70s, early 80s, when it came on the scene, the idea was let's bring dying back into the home, into its natural place. Nobody wants to die in the hospital. It is not a natural place to die in. And yet dying is very natural. We're all going to do it. It's part of our life experience. So hospice has really helped us refocus on the naturalness of the dying experience.
Yes, that is so well said. And it's a beautiful natural process when we allow it to unfold. You used that word, which I really like also. But unfortunately, in a medical facility like a hospital, the objective of the people who work there is to interrupt the natural process, to do whatever they can to prolong life, even when that life is just a fragile thread, to prolong it as long as possible. And we really have to come to terms with that, really think about what we want for ourselves and for our loved ones.
And that's why advance directives before we need them is so important. Because if we don't have an advance directive, if we don't outline how we want to be treated if we're very, very ill, then the medical establishment will treat us the way they think they should. And their job is to fight death. Even if they know they're not going to win, their job is to fight.
Wanted, since both of us have kind of a lot of years of experience in hospice, I thought it would be good to talk about the hospice journey kind of from A to Z and just start at the beginning for people who may not be familiar with hospice, but may be at a place where it's time to consider it for themselves or a loved one. And I figured you're just the best person to have this conversation with. So we'll just kind of ramble on and tell people everything we know. But maybe we should just start by, for anyone who isn't certain what hospice care is, just so they understand that in the first place.
Okay, well, hospice takes care of people that have 6 months or less to live, people that the doctors have said, I can't fix you. And that's the time to reach out for support and guidance because it can be a really scary, uncertain time. And hospice provides nursing, social work service, home health aides to help with bathing, chaplains, and volunteers. I think a really special part of hospice is that the agencies will train local community citizens in end of life. And those volunteers are assigned to families as a friend, as a listener, as a person to give the caregiver a chance to get out of the house or maybe just go to bed and take a nap. So hospice offers services so that you won't be alone as you navigate the often scary situation that life will put all of us in as we approach the end of our life.
And it was interesting. I just talked to a woman a few days ago who told me she was caring for her father at home and he needed to just get out of bed and into his wheelchair. And she was home alone with him and she had no idea how to do that, how to help him. So there are skills that can be extremely helpful to caregivers that they really should have, but the hospital staff, if when they're bringing someone home from the hospital, is not likely to teach them those skills, and that might be something they need to seek out. And the hospice staff can teach them, but they may need to make sure the hospice staff knows, I want you to train me and tell me what I need to know.
Well, and that's a good point in that hospices also have occupational therapists and physical therapists, and their skills working with the caregiver are as important. The patient may be beyond occupational therapy and physical therapy, but the caregiver can have that occupational therapist come in and say, here's how you transfer from bed to wheelchair or bed to commode. And yeah, that's a nice service to have.
Yes, definitely. And I wanted to mention some of the things that a caregiver might need to do for their loved one at home. Like oftentimes the caregiver ends up administering medications. It's under the supervision of the nurse who will explain the medications and how and when they're given, but it's usually the caregiver who gives those medications. And then just other tasks that the caregiver might perform for their loved one. If they say they have a parent that they would like to enroll in hospice who might be resistant to the idea, do you have thoughts on how to talk to them about it? I mean, I actually went through that with my own mother, who was really reluctant to go on hospice, even though she knew I'd worked in hospice all these years and she knew everything about it. But it was very hard for her to say yes to that decision. So sometimes that's one of the most important conversations we can have.
It is, because to say yes to hospice is saying, yes, I'm going to die. And that's hard. I mean, that's hard to come to that realization. And I get asked a lot about, mom doesn't want to talk about it, and yet I really think we need hospice. And so you say to mom, I know you don't want to talk about this, but I need to have this talk. And please give me this gift of hearing me out, of listening to me. And then I'm going to respect your decision. This is your life experience. But mom, I need you to hear what I'm dealing with, what I'm thinking, and what my ideas are. And you be honest. I know you don't want to talk about it, but give me this gift. Let's do it this time. Let's talk.
That's the perfect way actually to introduce it to a parent, because it's hard for a parent to turn down their own child when the child says, it's important to me, I need to talk about it.
Yeah. But as a spouse, you can do the same thing. You can also say, number one, I need to talk about this. And so bear with me, sit down with me, let's talk. And as a spouse, you can say, I'm going to be your caregiver and I need help. Do this because I need the support and the guidance. You will give me a gift, put it on you, the caregiver. Help.
But I wanted to emphasize one of the reasons for us to share this information today is that lay people, like family members and patients, need to know about hospice themselves, because their doctors may not recommend it to them. I still hear that. I still hear it from people all the time. The doctor didn't bring up hospice. I had to ask about it. So it's really important that people know enough to say that to the doctor and ask, how would I involve hospice?
Well, our medical model is about fixing people that have diseases. And what I like to say is that hospice is about taking care of people that have diseases, rather than the medical model, which addresses the disease that people may have. And as we approach the end of our life, just because you can't heal the physical body doesn't mean there isn't healing to be done. Emotional, mental, spiritual healing, because we're more than just our physical body. And I think that's one of the gifts that hospice has, is that it helps guide a person and a family. And I think it's really important that we stress hospice just doesn't take care of a person. We take care of the entire family as they go through this experience.
And I wanted to emphasize too, if given the fact that patients and their loved ones might have to initiate the conversation about hospice, when is a good time to bring it up? Because sometimes I fear that conversation doesn't happen until very close to the end of a patient's life, when there's not enough time for the hospice team to really come in and make as much impact as they could. So do you have thoughts on when should a family start talking about it or asking about it?
I don't mean this to sound harsh, but I think all of us at some point or another have looked at someone who was very sick and said to ourselves, he's not going to be here next year at this time. We've all thought it. And that's the time to start thinking hospice, because we give people more time than they really have. And I am for one to, when the doctor has said, I've given it my best shot and I can't fix you, you go and you start interviewing hospices.
That this is a big myth of people who have heard of hospice think it's about dying and you just admit people and they die right away. But in fact, you emphasize that hospice is really about living fully all of the remaining days of life. And it's just so important that we get that message across to people.
Oh, well, and what's so sad for me is that because people associate hospice with, well, we call them when the person is dying. Well, a person looks like they're dying 1 to 3 weeks before they die. In the months before death, when that disease is moving and growing, and in those months, a person looks sick, but they don't look like they're dying. And don't wait until you look at someone and go, oh my gosh, I think he's dying. Because that is 1 to 3 weeks. And what happens is hospice comes in and they do crisis intervention, because no one has really said, we're looking now at a week or so from death. And because we don't have any role models on what it's like to die, the way this person is dying naturally, normally will not look like our role models, which is television and the movies, look like. So we think something pathological is happening. And so the hospice then is just doing crisis intervention to help and support the family in this dying time. If you make earlier referrals when the person looks sick, but hasn't entered the dying process, then we can help everyone live, because that's what we're about. Live until you're not. You have nothing to lose by calling hospice and saying, my doctor hasn't said anything, which is too bad, but I'm worried and I'm concerned. Could someone come and just talk to me? And, like I said before, the worst thing that can happen is they can say, no, he's not appropriate. I would start with calling your physician and saying, I'm thinking about hospice, and talk to me about it. But even if the doctor says, nah, he's not ready, call hospice anyway and say, I talked to my doctor. He said, Dad's not really ready, but come talk to me. Tell me, so that when we are ready, we'll know when we're ready and we'll know how to reach out. Do your homework before you really need to, is my best advice. Don't hesitate to call before you're drowning, because then think of all the time you've wasted, all the good support you
may have seen. So I think that would be a good thing too, to talk about the last few days of life and what the dying process actually looks like.
Okay, well, let's break it down into months, weeks, days, and hours. You can't put a number on how long someone has to live. The closest you can get is months, weeks, days, and hours. And what you're going to look for someone who has a gradual death. Remember, I mentioned fast or gradual. A gradual death. Old age is going to take longer. So when I talk about the signs of approaching death, that someone who has a disease, when I talk about months, someone who's just old, you're going to have years. It isn't until we get down to days, hours, and minutes that everyone dies the same. All right. So 2, 3, 4 months before death from disease, 3 things start happening. You don't have to know blood values. You don't even have to know a person's disease to just look at these 3 things: a person's eating habits, their sleeping habits, and their social interaction habits. Eating, 2, 3, 4 months before death, a person will stop eating meat. And then pretty soon it's fruits and vegetables. This is on a continuum over these 2 to 3 to 4 months. Meat, fruits and vegetables, then anything that requires energy to digest. Then they get to soft foods. You're doing good if you can get yogurts and creamed soup, scrambled eggs, ice cream. We love our ice cream. You can get ice cream down almost to the very end. But then in the weeks to days before death, you're not getting any food, and generally not any water down them either. So think about food as the energy we put in our body to make it go. And if the body's preparing to die, it doesn't want the energy. And so all by itself, it will cut back and stop eating.
That's a really good point to point out, because some families feel they should force their loved one to eat, or they try to make special dishes and even apply guilt to try to get their loved one to eat. And it's fine to allow them to not eat if they choose not to and they don't feel like it.
Always, always offer, but don't force the food. They want to eat. They want to eat for us because they see what their not eating does to us. But they'll say, I can't eat. I can't. And it's because the body doesn't want the energy, the grounding. The other thing is sleep. Again, over a period of months, a person will start with an afternoon nap, and then a morning and an afternoon nap, and then they're asleep all evening. And then one day they don't get out of bed. and then they're asleep more than awake. And then with social interactions, again, it starts with they're not interested in their favorite sports or what's going on in the world around them. And then it's pretty soon, don't have the church ladies come over. And then they withdraw from family themselves, and they actually go completely within, which is what they should do. In the weeks before death, 1 to 3, you will notice a significant change. And that key change is a person starts sleeping with their eyes partially open. They start picking their clothes, the random hand movements, the start and stop breathing. All of these are significant changes. And that says to us, labor has begun. Let me say it this way. We are birthed into this world. We go through labor to get into this world, and we go through labor to leave it. It's work to get out of our body, and it takes 1 to 3 weeks. And all of our attention is directed toward getting out of our body. So there isn't conversations. There isn't watching TV. They're sleeping and getting out of their body. There are other changes that say death is within minutes to hours. Now their hands and feet are bluish, dark colored. You probably can't even get a blood pressure. They're non-responsive. And that's just before they let go is when you're going to see the facial expression, the grimace, the frown. Congestion is going to depend upon how much fluids they have in their body. It is natural and normal to be dehydrated. When we're dehydrated, our calcium goes up. And if your calcium goes up high enough, you close your eyes, you go to sleep, and you don't wake up.
And yet, I think working in hospice gives you such a different perspective and allows you to see the sacredness in dying and to be a participant in the sense of we're supporting the natural process and we're helping this family get through it. And it's so gratifying and so wonderful to be part of.
Oh, it is. I mean, I've 40 years worth of this work, and it's what I'm on the planet for.